Hello everybody. Welcome. Willkommen. Which is kind of funny because now, these days, this is a relatively new phenomenon where I live, in my experience. It's very common when one walks into a shop or a cafe or a restaurant to hear the specific phrase, "welcome in," which very closely resembles Willkommen. I don't know the actual pronunciation of that since I'm not sure I've ever heard it pronounced. Possibly. It's been quite chilly where I live lately, but warm in the days. Over the past few weeks, I've listened to a number of podcasts or interviews, conversations. And I've been particularly attentive to a new channel for me. I don't know when it was established, called Eyes on Cinema, which is a rather strange name given the content. I suppose it's possible that the channel started out perhaps speaking about film, or intending to, and then maybe shifted over time to the presentation of recordings with witnesses, experiencers, abductees, and so forth, who have had encounters with UFOs. And as a collection of such material, this channel is very surprising and I think extremely valuable, because it presents a historical perspective of events going back perhaps as far as the 1930s or earlier 40s, 50s. I'm not sure when the earliest report there is from. And these are often first-hand accounts of people who've had experiences, many of them abductees, quote unquote. I have so many thoughts. Quite a large number of them, well, I have listened to a reasonable number of reports directly from children. These children and many of the adults had neither concern nor awareness nor introductions that we can reasonably understand as being this to UFOs, meaning that they were completely ignorant of the topic prior to their experiences. Most of them, especially the adults, initially presumed a prosaic explanation. There's a variety of extremely common features between the reports of these people who do not know each other, did not know each other, reasonably were uninterested in the topic or knew nothing about it. And while there are occasionally, you can find humans who seem to be in some way grandiose or attention-seeking, almost all of these people are precisely the opposite. They are quote-unquote regular everyday folks, especially the children, who certainly are aware that saying anything about these things will get them punished, right? Socially, relationally, reputationally, and so forth. So it's very important to understand that the vast majority of these people never sought these experiences, were uninterested in these experiences, had no desire to tell anyone about these experiences, except in the sense that, as a human being, if you encounter an unusual thing or something that lays waste to the commonsensical ontological suppositions of ordinary folks, meaning what can and cannot happen, what should and should not happen, what is possible, what is impossible, etc. Anyone, right, would naturally feel a humanitarian concern, a concern for the other people on the planet, the other children, the other families, the other adults, the other animals, all of these beings, which we all have a concern about this, unless we are very unusual or in a strange state of mind, or way of mind, since minds don't have states. Anyone would feel the responsibility and the obligation to say something. And this is less of a problem in other countries or cultures, non-Western, non-American, non-US. In the US, this entire topic has been thoroughly psyoped and rendered into a variety of caricatures that have nothing to do with humans or what they've actually experienced, and everything to do with defending the narratives and the ontologies that have captured us and that are intrinsic and crucial to preserving the systems that dominate and enslave and parade around as our, liberators or doctors or, authorities and so forth. And I want to say a couple of things before I get started. Human gullibility, quote unquote, is a real, is an aspect of being human. We are all, nearly all of us, I would imagine, and it's not like we're in static states. But we are all subject to our own blindness and our own ignorance. And most people are aware that the, quote, illusions, unquote, provided for, quote, entertainment by magicians are almost always have nothing to do with actual magic. And we might be inclined to suppose that because it is possible to produce an illusion that appears magical or non-ordinary or impossible, that all phenomena that appear non-ordinary, magical, or impossible are lies. Well, I want to be really clear here. Although it is possible for humans to be gullible and to be fooled, there is no gullibility greater and more profound in its effects and more devastating to human intelligence, awareness, development, creativity, ontological coherence than this dismissive, completely absurd perspective, which can be stated as something like, everything I have ever experienced is pragmatically ordinary, and there are no phenomena that do not have this classification. Any such phenomena that may be presented by others will be rejected with grave and serious denigrations. This is the ultimate gullibility, right? And this is the irony, because these folks, people in the grip, people whose minds have been captured by this disease, this thrisp, and are now essentially intellectual robots running around trying to kill anything that violates this thrisp's dominance and authority and contagiousness. These people who claim that others are gullible, right, are actually enacting a form of gullibility that pervades far beyond the common gullibility. A person's willing to explore our human nature, existence, and the phenomena of the universe and the earth with an open mind, a sense of passionate curiosity, a sense of wonder and awe. There's nothing gullible about that, right? What's gullible is to presuppose the nature of phenomena in such a way as to deprive yourself and others of the direct, obvious existence and experience and participation in these phenomena. So that is the real gullibility. And it's often very ironic how captured minds, human minds that have been subjected to these processes, these structured, fossilized remains of intelligence and interaction and relation and exploration and research and experiment and play and creativity and discovery. These captured minds are dead inside. And it is entirely possible to hold an ontology that is so rigid, so inflexible, so fragile, that any threat to it must be responded to with a kind of violence, a cognitive violence. Am I gullible? Yes, I'm sometimes gullible. Am I particularly gullible as regards my own biases? Much more so than usual. Is gullibility the only feature that I'm able to bring forth and express and enact? Not even kind of. I'm certainly capable of clear-minded, lucid analysis. I've worked with a scientist for 20 years. We edit biomedical papers primarily out of Asia. I wouldn't have that job if I was a gullible person who put no faith in science. Now, this word science is very deceptive because it doesn't refer to an actually producible thing, and we should notice that. If people say, like, where's the evidence? Well, where's the evidence for science? Qua science, right? It's not in any instance of science because science is a category. It's not a person. You know, when you hear these headlines like scientists have found, bullshit. That's just lying. Specific researchers have done specific experiments and have validated their approach and have made hypotheses, which are not facts. They are interpretations of relationships between elements of an experimental situation. There's no such thing as scientists have found. Zero of that phenomenon exists. Yet ordinary folks will very gullibly believe that this means scientists are all saying the same thing, right? That the propositions of a specific paper or group of papers are facts. We stand enlightened in the aftermath of these monumental publications. No, Nothing like that is going on. There might be occasional exceptions where the facticity of a specific study or a group of published papers or so forth does radically call into question previous suppositions and hypotheses, or presents something new and profound that we have not previously been aware of the possibility of, right? So prior to this, it seemed impossible. After this, we know it to be, reasonably worth examining, worth come on, hippocampus. Can't find the word I'm looking for. It means something like to see as if. Worth granting the possibility or likelihood of. But all scientific propositions, with very few exceptions, some, not none, will be overturned as the field of knowledge develops around them. Or they will be what is called sometimes rescued. Right. So in the way that relativity rescues classical physics, Newtonian physics, and doesn't invalidate it, it just gives it a vaster context and some other perspectival features and explanatory power and testable experiments and so forth for these new paradigms. That's rather synchronistic. So, the authority of research rests primarily in those who authorize it and who perform it, and unfortunately, and this should never be the case in science, who funds it, right? Or who might be offended, threatened, or upset by the effects of the published results. None of those things should have anything to do with scientific endeavors. Yet in our time, nearly all of them almost always do. And the only people that are free of that are independent scientists, which previously was probably, not so very long ago, was probably all of them. Yeah? There was no attachment. What is this? It looks a lot like a relatively fresh owl pellet, which common people might just suppose is poop. Ah, yes, this is the perfect kind of a tree. Let's have a closer look at this. Oh, here's a stick. Yeah, this is an owl pellet, almost certainly. There's some crayfish remains in here. A lot of red. It's very fresh. Probably a few hours old. Of course, it doesn't necessarily come from an owl. We should call it a raptor pellet. So, I have been a student of science since childhood and fascinated by it, and I've always had great reverence for it until I began to understand that science, like most other aspects of human endeavor, had been captured incompletely but very severely by the Thrisp-like processes that capture our species and our nations and our societies and our behavior and our minds. I don't feel confident, excuse me, that there's no metaphysics to this, no spiritual or non-ordinary or paranormal aspects. I don't feel confident of that. But the reason that I've proposed the toy that involves the human cognitium, the network of human minds, the mimula, which is the infrastructure of that network, and thrisps, which are processes that live in and capture features of the infrastructure for the sake of dominance in human minds, contagion, reproductive and mutational acceleration, and so forth. The reason that I've proposed these toys is that any ordinary person who rejects metaphysical, non-ordinary, or paranormal ideation will still be able to see how this could be and how it could work. Will still be able to entertain this without the necessity of thinking about Moloch or Watiko or demons, who may very well be somehow involved. I like to make toys that work whether or not you believe, whether or not you have faith or experience of or in the non-ordinary or the paranormal, the spiritual, the religious, and so forth. I like to make toys that anyone could play with. Perspectival toys. So when I became aware that science, like most other human endeavors, had become very thoroughly captured by the military prison industrial complexes and so forth, and the hierarchical Tower of Babel of thrisps that have infested the human cognitium and continue to succeed and prosper there. Then I became much more concerned about what we might think of as, quote, mainstream science, unquote, which really means like thrisp-generated, captured, motivated. And I've often said that a scientist of any moral or ethical compunction or predilection these days would refuse to publish because the entire endeavor serves anti-organismal, anti-human processes that eat worlds and spit out dead structure like machines and bombs and missiles and drones and AI and crap like this. But I had a particular insight earlier, before I began the recording, which I thought might make good fodder for a little talk. I was listening today to Jeffrey Mishlove. Long may he prosper. What a brilliant, heartful, provocative, and generous human being. I have a book. I have a book from his bookshelf. He wrote his name in it a long time. I got it a long time ago. I think it's on the nature of consciousness. It's a beautiful, strange, elaborate pictorial book. If I'm remembering the right one, actually, now that I'm thinking more carefully, Jeffrey, I think, wrote that book on consciousness. And the book that I have that used to be on his shelf is Jacques Vallée's The Invisible College. Vallée lives here in the city. And one of my close friends, Mike Rezel, upgraded Dr. Vallée's website very radically and altruistically some time ago. So I have a little minor connection with Olay. We occasionally get Christmas cards from him and his wife. But yeah, what I was thinking about, so I was listening to an interview between Jeffrey Mishlove and Leslie Kean, a New York Times journalist, brilliant, another amazing, brilliant human being. And I wish that some of these people would notice the inverse gullibility of the quote-unquote skeptics and remark upon it, because we've really got this entirely backwards in so many ways, as is so common for us moderns. And Leslie was talking about the physicalization experiences that she's had with mediums in Europe. Not particularly what I think we would usually call apports, right, which is the production of a physical object in a controlled seance environment, not always controlled. But rather ectoplasm and materialization phenomena, including the materialization of human beings who can speak and touch you, hands, of which there are wax casts produced under extreme conditions of control. Often the medium themselves is thoroughly strapped to an ordinary chair. In any case, it's not my goal today to talk about the history of materialization phenomena or seances. Though this is something I have some reasonable degree of awareness of and historical interest in. And it's not because I'm gullible. It's because I'm sensitive. And I'm very unusually sensitive. And I think my father was very concerned about this because he had some degree of a similar sensitivities. And my sensitivities are strange. And often I flee from them because they can cause me trouble in various ways. I can sense things that others don't sense, and if I remark on them, this can quickly become problematical in a broad variety of ways. Features of phenomena or situational perspectives. I am peculiarly adept at sensing in these ways. In any case, something occurred to me, linked, I think, between the UFO phenomena, or certain branches of that phenomena, and these materialization experiences that Leslie has firsthand, many experiences of, in different places with different mediums, and particularly with a few mediums with whom she has become very close. And these people are also wildly uninterested, in many of them, in publicity, being known, making money this way. These are not people who are motivated by common concerns. They are motivated by something very primordial. And to make other claims in order to denigrate them is an act of stupidity and cruelty, ignorance. And those things are bad enough, but when they become violent and are directed against others, this is unjustifiable and wrong. So I've made the link now between, very briefly, provisionally, between ectoplasm, particularly, which is a liminal phenomena, right? It's a sort of a between state that lies between matter and energy, or matter and spirit, however we want to think about it. We must imagine that our distant ancestors were vastly more aware of and familiar with these phenomena because they had not yet developed ontologies that evicted them, forbade them, punished them directly, or, genocided the people who had these experiences or were productive of such experience. So we must imagine that long ago humans were living in a very different universe in their common experience and reflection and their suppositions, their ontologies, which were probably very rarely formal and much more relational and experiential. But before I continue, I just want to backtrack a bit. There are many reports from children, and the children clearly have a deep concern with veracity around these experiences, with not saying what didn't happen, and not making suppositions, and just clearly saying what they experienced and can remember and can articulate, in the same way that a witness under oath, right? Like, this is a very strange thing. We have to formally subject you to oath making before we can listen to what you say. So these children's reports, especially very young children, the chances of them having been invented are basically zero, very small, exceptions noted, but that's, again, the tiniest portion of the pie. And the chances of these just being, made up, the child has a very vivid imagination, this kind of bullshit nonsense. It's certainly true that children have vivid imaginations, and one of the most important questions is, by what methods are they deprived of them over time? How were we deprived of those vivid imaginations? The common, prosaic explanation is, you grow out of that. Bullshit. No one grows out of that. That has to be threatened out of you, punished out of you. You have to be rewarded for every defection from it, consecutively, consistently, recursively. You don't grow out of a vivid imagination. This is definitely not what happens. Being subjugated to representational thought, culture, expectation space, perspectival dominion, slavery, right? That's what kills our imaginations, not growing up. How do I know this? Because I had a vivid imagination, and I managed to preserve some of it against the endless assaults from without. Artists, writers, actors, dancers, painters, poets, singers, musicians, and occasionally even a scientist have found methods, in a way, practices, to assist them in these preservations and to defend them from assault. Right? You have to have a pretty vivid imagination to write a piece of music, but since this can be commodified, it's not, directly assaulted. So yeah, the children's reports are among the most interesting because the children, when you hear them speak, you can sense that they are guileless, right? They are neither beguiled nor beguiling. They're desperately trying to say, as clearly as they are capable of saying, what they saw, felt, thought, experienced, what happened, an account. Right? So the people who think, you believe those children, you're gullible. No, they are the gullible ones. They are gullible, again, in the shadow of the ontological, the domineering and malignant ontological demands of representational culture and cognition. So if we're going to throw stones, let's throw that one first, in my view. All right, so back to this other thing. Now, there are a variety of features of reports, and many of these reports have serious witnesses, right? There was a woman in New York, I think it's circa 70s, could be 80s, who remembers being floated through her wall, 10 stories up in her apartment, out into a craft. Now, everyone would be inclined to think, like, that's just not possible. You can't float through a wall. I heard a child say, "They took me through the wall, but I didn't get dirty." This is brilliant, honest clarity from a child, little girl. And this was witnessed by, many people witnessed both the non-ordinary object, which humans usually refer to as a vehicle, and they witnessed her being floated out of the window into this craft from a nearby bridge. And two of those people were intelligence operatives attached to, what? I may get this part wrong, but I think like a Secretary General from a country, probably the United States, who had been at the UN. There were police that saw it. There were many, many witnesses. At least 20. And these witnesses came out later and were connected to the event long after the woman who experienced this began to tell her story. It's really easy to find this case and data related to it on the internet. I listened to essentially a deposition by her account of what happened a few days ago, and I was aware of her and have heard her story a few times. It's on the tip of my tongue, her name. Last name begins with N. But she was called Corteil. She had a pseudonym with the last name of Corteil, which apparently in Italian means dead end. I think her name is Linda. Linda Corteil, maybe. But that's not her real name. And she wrote a book, eventually. So, let's just ask a simple question. What is it, how is it, that human beings can be transported through solid objects? Subjected to various medical or, medical seeming procedures, and then replaced in their beds later, often with, medically provable signs of injury, in their noses, in their genitals or rectal tissue, on their legs, on their body, their eyes. Right? So, what the hell is going on there? Like, we all have been trained to suppose that a human being is a single state thing, right? It has a single state, physical state, that's it. There's no extra states. And as a physical being, of course I don't believe these things, but an aspect of my mind is well trained in this, and certainly first moves would be to suppose such things, for sure. Even me. I've had wild non-ordinary experience, but nonetheless I still believe that, unfortunately, I believe that this iron ring that I'm looking at, the steel ring that lock bikes to, that stuff's solid. I can't just pass my hand through that. However, I know of a method whereby I could. And that method has vastly more primacy over nature and reality than anything the humans think. And I talk a lot about that in my dandelion recordings. You can just look up that phrase. I also have a Medium essay about this. In any case, there are a vast number of reports, more than 100, probably more than 1,000, of human beings somehow being transferred to a liminal state, a between state, such that they can easily and without any resistance pass through objects that we consider to be concrete, physical things. You can't move stuff through that wall, bruh. Right? According to just about everyone. Right? I mean, I think if you just went around surveying people and saying, like, is there a situation under which you can walk through a concrete wall? I suspect that, 99.x% of respondees would say no, there isn't. But you'd have to clarify in your physical body, right? And then just about everybody would say no. But this is not true. This is not what's going on. The commonsensical and prosaic ontologies that we exist enslaved to, dominated by, are bullshit. They're much more bullshit than the wild claims of people who've had non-ordinary experiences. Vastly, vastly more bullshitty. And the fact that some people do make things up, or some people can be delusional, or some people do, there's some cohort somewhere that's interested in tricking people or so forth, or, self-aggrandizement, or appearing more important or special in relation to others. Yeah, sure, there's a piece of the pie that's like that. It's a tiny piece compared to actual people who experience stuff and then talk about it. So the fact that delusions and tricks exist in no way invalidates the experiences that the delusions and tricks attempt to portray. A well-known problem for professional mediums was that many of them were in fact capable of producing non-ordinary phenomena under certain conditions, and those conditions are not necessarily mechanical. They are spiritual conditions. Right? Who is in the room with me? What's going on? What is in the relational milieu between us? These kinds of conditions. But they could not produce them reliably. And if they made their living as a medium, someone subject to this problem might somewhat naturally, again, a small percentage of such people, become concerned with being able to produce the appearance of phenomena on occasions when they could not directly produce the phenomena itself. So that branch of fakery had its origins probably in actual phenomena, but what gave birth to that was the irreproducibility problem. This is part of why it's very difficult to produce these effects in a laboratory, where the relational milieu is grim, dim, terrifying, dead inside, and so forth. Well lit, etc. So there's lots of reports of people being, human beings, somehow being placed in a situation where their concrete physicality is suspended or transcended and passed through physical objects, walls and windows and so forth. And I find this very interesting for lots of reasons. One of the things that I found interesting about this is that descriptions of ectoplasm, you can look that up if you're unfamiliar with ectoplasm, a phenomena that some mediums produce, which is like the extrusion, often from their hands or fingers, sometimes from their mouths or faces, sometimes from other parts of their bodies, of a sort of transcendental meta-substance that looks a little bit like structured water, and may be bright, may be luminous in some cases. So it occurred to me that many aspects of the UFO and UAP phenomena resemble aspects of other states or, okay, come on, vocabulary. Other modes of the relationship between energy and matter. And obviously there are, a bunch of weird phenomena that surround UFO encounters. Often it is very silent, which I think is super interesting, because we might imagine that the whole area, or the area local to the event, is being transformed in such a way that it isn't that everything has become silent, but rather that the atmosphere no longer conducts sound, right? Something has changed a feature of the atmosphere that would ordinarily conduct sound. And so noises are still there, they're just unhearable. There's often reports of weird kinds of glows, luminosity features, that are strangely localized, which in one case, some men who encountered a craft, it shined a light on them, but the light did not illuminate them. And this suggests something similar in the environment, in the context, where the expected functions of light itself and possibly other waves have been transformed. They're not in the familiar modes that we might suppose are the only modes they can be in. So then, I was just speculating openly, playing in my mind around this, and I thought, what if some branch of the phenomena, the UFO, UAP thing, is related to this ectoplasm thing, and it's a kind of structured ectoplasm, right, that appears as beings and bodies and so forth. And there are situations under which structured ectoplasm might be preservable, even maybe in the form of a corpse. So I just was noticing some similitude between certain UFO and UAP encounters. Some of them seem much more like simply physical events, right? There was a ship, there were some guys inside the ship, rarely women, rarely females, but occasionally. There was a ship, there were some guys inside the ship, they took me in the ship, we talked, they showed me stuff, we had some food, they told me what they were up to. There's a branch of the phenomenon that is more or less like that, and is more likely to represent what we would think of as extraterrestrials, meaning people from other planets. But there's a vast, this is a forest of branches. It's not one thing by any chance. There's no chance of it being one thing. So yeah, when I was listening to Leslie talk about materialization phenomena in seance, quote-unquote, settings, it occurred to me that some branches of the UFO and UAP phenomena might be related in the sense that they are materialization phenomena rather than the appearance of concrete phenomena, which is what the ordinary humans will generally expect and what they would love to dismiss if it has features that don't belong to concrete phenomena. I remember Dr. Lukatsky recently, in conversation with George someone and another guy, saying that if you want to understand the UFO UAP phenomena, this is a guy who's worked in black projects, scientist, he said nuts and bolts will get you nowhere. You have to take in the entire sphere of the paranormal and the what I would call the non-ordinary. To have any chance of understanding it. It's a very interesting comment from a physicist, which I'm pretty sure Lukács is. I also don't care at all. Well, I do care, but I'm completely unmoved by people who like to attack the character of people who are reporting and commit the ad hominem fallacy. Well, I don't like this guy's character, so what he has to say has no merit. And go ahead and think like that. If you can imagine a bird that rips all of its feathers out and will only allow flight if the one feather that it likes best on its right wing is the only remaining feather. Well, that bird never flies. It may be very sure that flight is impossible because its situation in the mind prohibits flight. And by flight, I mean insight, understanding, awareness, perspectival coherence, revelation, learning, discovery. All discoveries violate ontologies. This is the nature of experiment. The goal of experiment is to violate ontologies. So the people that are sitting around going, I like my pet ontology, that guy did something weird, I don't believe in him. Good for you. Your chances of walking in the mind are 0. You will walk only on ground you have previously established and that causes no threat to your supposition of authoritative dominance over the nature and possibility of phenomena. That perspective is dead from the get-go. Right? That gets you nowhere but where you've been before. It does protect you from certain kinds of deceptions, but there are vastly more effective and useful methods for that. So yeah, the ad hominem thing, like that guy, he plays Call of Duty, I don't believe him. I don't give a shit what you believe. Your beliefs have like 0 value to me. And your metrics for authoritative, your metrics for what's authoritative and what should be dismissed are ridiculously primitive and not useless because they destroy minds, but not useful in the sense that they do not liberate them. So I got a tiny chip on my shoulder about skeptics at the moment, as some of you may have noticed over my past few videos. Leslie Kean's interviews are fascinating and brilliant. She is a very rational person, and it's extremely challenging when you have an experience that essentially obliterates everything that you thought was impossible and radically transforms your expectation space, your speculative space, your exploration space in your consciousness and awareness. That's a very challenging thing to experience for anyone. We all have been impressed with this feature of ontological structure that wants to defend itself from any threat at all. What actually, I want you to think for a moment of an experience you had where you encountered something, and you may have later figured out, quote, what it was, unquote. Not necessarily the best move, by the way. But you encountered something that you didn't know what it was. And that experience by itself, even if it just seems to be an object of some kind, is pretty shocking, kind of terrifying, right? Like, wow, there's something that doesn't fit into my category bookshelf. What the fuck? Does this mean everything is broken? Like, cognitively, this is an extremely fraught situation, particularly for moderns who expect ordinariness. Weirdly, the expectation of normalcy dramatically impedes your capacity to experience things that aren't normal or notice them. or be aware of them at all. But think about a time when you encountered something that you didn't know what it was. And, I've had people come to me with non-ordinary experiences and say, what do you think this was? And one of the things that I realize after a few games like this with people is that they're really highly motivated to categorize the experience. They want to know, quote, what, unquote, it was. That's problematical for a whole bunch of reasons, because what, unquote, it was supposes that it didn't come from them. It didn't involve them being there, right? They presume that the phenomenon is outside themselves. And if there's a phenomenon like that, I'd love someone to show me it, because without a self, there's no phenomena, right? There's zero phenomena with no self. Phenomena is a relationship between what can be thought of as exterior and what can be thought of as interior. Both of those thoughts are wrong, but they're not entirely unuseful. We wouldn't want to just throw them away. One of the things that occurred to me was, why not leave it in the superposition where it doesn't fit in one of your little slots? Right? What if the mystery is actually mysterious? There are mysterious features of nature and the universe. In fact, nearly all of the features of nature and the universe are fundamentally mysterious. Sorry to have to break this to you. What the humans have is this weird little game they play where they pretend that they're not, and that they know stuff, and that they know what stuff is. And this game is based on a bunch of circular nonsense involving labels. Right? Nobody I've met has any idea what a tree is, but they think they do. Because it fits categorically on the little bookshelf of tokens. Tree. It's a plant. It's a big plant. Sometimes it has fruit. We make paper and wood out of it. Telephone poles, hilariously. Right? Transmit energy across distances using trees. What a fucking idea. I'm sure none of that was going on before we got that idea. So yeah, one of the things that occurred to me, which I have learned to do in some cases myself, and many of my insights are very difficult for me to enact because I'm a regular human too. A lot of me is, kind of ordinary. Leave it in the superposition. Leave it mysterious. Why do you feel you have to categorize it? Does that actually help you? When might that be deleterious for your intelligence, awareness, development, and learning? Leave a space for mystery. Yeah. Let some things be uncollapsed into tokens and labels. I have enjoyed the incredible privilege and pleasure of kissing someone I am entranced by. There is no explanation for that phenomenon. I don't care what science says or blah, blah, blah. That phenomenon is essentially transcendental. It's magical. It's divine. It's, beyond the ordinary in every way. And over time, I did come to take that for granted. And thus became immune to the mystery and the profundity of it. Right? Because I'm now very familiar with this companion and expect the continuity of my familiar defections from intimacy and so forth, right? So these are some of my thoughts for today. Deeply grateful to all of the beings who have come before and will come after me, physical and non, and particularly my mentors and those I looked up to, people who, a huge number of science fiction and fantasy writers who re-informed, right? They rebubbleized and re-diversified and revitalized and restored my ontologies so that they would not just collapse into stick figures of what can and cannot be, what should and should not be, what did and did not happen, and so forth. So much gratitude and reverence for all those brilliant beings, who my mind is their child. Those are the parents of my mind, so to speak. And other beings who are not human, who are also the parents of my mind. The sun, this world, the moon, the animals, plants, insects, the waters, the light on the waters, the other planets, the stars, time-space, the great home of all beings. So much reverence and adoration to them and to you. I wish you beauty, liberation, insight, healing, love, play, creativity, health, well-being. Thank you for joining me. I look forward to learning again together very soon. Bye-bye for now.